Don't look now, but it's a whole new world of weed out there. Pot is flower, it's Bruce Banner and Blue Dream. You've got bongs and dabs, resin and shatter, vaping and edibles, new terms, new strains, and new ways to use cannabis sativa, the plant. Some just made with CBD, and hemp has minimal THC. There's sativa and indica strains, and 100 chemicals, all legal in 10 states for adult use. There's a lot to get to know. Get used to it, folks, because it's legal in the Bay State and it's not going away. Neither is In the Weeds with Jimmy Young next. Revolutionary Clinics is just one of 49 medical cannabis dispensaries in Massachusetts, but there's a reason why it's one of the most popular. It's their patient-first philosophy. All day long, they teach, they educate, they communicate about this complicated plant called cannabis sativa. That's true whether you visit their Cambridge location in Fresh Pond at 110 Fawcett Street or at 67 Broadway in Somerville. Revolutionary Clinics, where the patient comes first. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, again, on location at O'Neill & Associates. This is one of the largest PR firms in Boston. They also have offices in Washington, D.C., where everything happens. Thomas P. O'Neill III is in studio with us, along with Chris Niles, his Vice President of Government Relations here at O'Neill & Associates. And guys, thank you so much for finding time in your very busy schedule to join me here in your place of business.
Jimmy, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you.
So what if...
And Niles, by the way, he's the vice president in charge of all things cannabis.
Okay, I see. Well, government relations covers that now too, doesn't it?
Does.
It certainly does. Yeah,
all things cannabis. I like that. Mm-hmm. Fascinating time to be part of a new historic industry. Massachusetts, my home state, makes it legal in 2016 via the ballot box. They've had a medical program. And now that stigma that has been in place for 90 years of prohibition is coming down, and the new normal is evolving. And it's a fascinating time because it involves democracy, it involves capitalism, it involves rules and regulations and politics and plenty of other stuff too. Are you finding this a fascinating time to be part of this industry in some capacity?
I'm old enough to remember when it was actually an issue, to a point in time today where it's, as you point out, no longer an issue. And that it's just happened, and it's happened for many good reasons. And as you know it, and my friend Chris here will tell you, the torch will have to go through the evolution of this industry for the next 10 to 20 years is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and I would say it's happened. The cultural change has happened very quickly, but it was a very very strategic process that a lot of advocates and organizers have gone through over the last few years. We started with decriminalization, we went to medical use, and now with adult use. And a lot of people suffered along the way, and I think that's something that we all kind of keep in mind working on this. That there were a lot of people who were during the Prohibition era, which is now quickly eroding, that were victims of cannabis crimes, and that certainly plays a role in what's how this industry is evolving.
Right.
You know what's interesting about that is what's fascinating in these times is to watch this year's presidential race, where it's a non-factor, a non-issue. Kamala Harris's line when she was asked if she'd ever smoked marijuana, she said, "Are you kidding? Half my family's Jamaican." And it just...
That's it.
It put to rest the entirety of the issue. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Diffuse it through cultural, and that's beautiful, right?
It sure is. Absolutely.
So, again, a fascinating time. And there's been a lot of different... Chris, you did a great job of kind of looking at the whole thing. You mentioned the social equity movement for those who have been adversely affected by the war on drugs. Here in Massachusetts and in other states that are looking at Massachusetts as an example, they're trying to figure out ways to do right by these people. And no one's really been able to figure out how to do it. Frustration, Thomas?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of frustration, and I think that's one of the issues we're going to have to contend with. I know Bonnie Frank did your show, and I thought he was right on, spot on, when he said, hey, look, why don't we get the banking issue behind us as number one priority? And he's right.
Right.
Because there is inequity. I mean, if you're poor, if you're If you're a person of color, chances are you're not bankable. We want to make sure that everybody has that same opportunity to get into this business and derive an income.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think Cannabis Control Commission took a number of steps in that direction, and I think their equity program is being looked at as a model for the rest of the country. But I think to Tom's point, the banking is really critical to leveling the playing field. And until that happens, I think there is a barrier to entry because of the financial needs of these startup businesses, which is what in large part a lot of these companies are.
Yeah, and it's funny, when that happens, we're recording on, I want to make this very clear that we're recording on Thursday, June 20th.
That's right, the 20th.
20th, right? Because tomorrow's the first day of summer. I kind of remember that through my years. By next week, this could be dated, because the Safe Banking Act, as you mentioned, may be the most simple thing to get accomplished before Congress resumes, because I spent a few days in Washington, D.C. during the lobby days back in May. And let me tell you, you mentioned my sports career. Doing a stand-up with the Capitol over my shoulder was one of the strangest things I've ever had to do in my career. Never thought in a million years I'd be doing something like that, reporting from our nation's capital.
But you found it, when you went down there, you found it to be an issue that was bipartisan.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I thought that, and especially in a time when Washington is a tad partisan these days, would you say? Is that accurate?
More than a tad. But on this issue, no. I mean, it's no longer a watershed issue. There are inequities in the business that need to be streamlined and need to be dealt with. And that's what Congress should be focusing on. But basically, the great laboratories of democracy are the states, as opposed to the federal government. And they ought to, what they should do is resort back to allow the states, to figure out what it is they want in their respective places.
I was a history major at Tufts University, and the back and forth between the federal government and states has been going on for the hundreds of years that we've been in existence, and we're seeing that again with cannabis right in the middle of it. One of the interesting things about Massachusetts is they got it done through a ballot question. Only one state has done it through the legislature, and that was Illinois recently, if I remember correctly. Do you expect the ballot box to be the key factor in this? Is that the more powerful way to enact change?
I would say, and I defer to Tom on this, obviously, but it seems like for these first 10 or so states that have approved it, I think the ballot question was probably the most expedient way to do it. But I think what we'll see in states, and we do a lot of work in Connecticut and in the New England region, and I think we're seeing a lot of legislatures looking at this issue and doing it through a standalone bill as opposed to the ballot. I think that's honestly the best way to do it. I think it's the best product that comes out as opposed to a ballot question, because you do have that opportunity to make tweaks and changes. And obviously, Massachusetts, the legislature did, after the ballot question passed, the legislature came back and made some adjustments. And I think that's the future of it. Now that the dam is kind of broken with these first few states, I think it will continue. I think the legislatures will have a little bit more incentive to do it through the regular legislative process.
Right. And the only thing I'd add to that would be, rather than the ballot box, I mean, people go and elect men and women to their legislatures around the country. That's their job, to figure out what's best in the interests of the public at large, to represent them in their interest. And so I think things are much better off, frankly, through the legislative process than they are at the ballot box, where people, frankly, will go and vote, but should be more informed, perhaps, than they are.
This is where I was going with this, is education. And the more science and research that is done on this plant, the more they find out about its uses. And when people tell me, well, we have to make this, legal because we have to do more research. And I said, did you know that there's been 29,000 studies done on the cannabis plant already in this country by the Substance Abuse Group? And of course, they were looking for reasons to find not to use it. What are the problems? Right. And guess what? Less than 4%. Do you know how many studies have been done on opioids? 880 studies on opioids. Now, that's a big difference. I wasn't a math major, but 29,000 versus 8, there's a big disparity there.
Disparity. But around issues like CBD, I mean, it's in every product you can buy.
Yep.
My kids use it on their pets.
And the pets love it, by the way.
Pets apparently love it. But more science, frankly, is needed, Jimmy.
Right.
On this alone, because the state of Massachusetts stepped in and put some preventions or roadblocks in place on CBD, to stop it from being used in foods before we understand exactly what the effect of using the drug in food is going to be.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot more over the next few years from the federal government, state, and local to figure out how we're integrating CBD, how we're integrating cannabis generally into edibles, into all sorts of different products, and that there remains to be a lot of work around that issue.
Yeah.
So something we're watching closely.
CBD is an anti-inflammatory component, one of the hundreds of molecules that they've discovered, and now they can extract it and use it. We've got 21st century science for a plant that's been around for thousands of years.
Right.
I don't know if you saw the news item about archaeologists in China found burnt cannabis from 2,500 years ago in a burial ground in China. 2,500 years ago.
So it's not a secret, Jimmy.
It's been around and used for thousands of years, and now they're finally figuring out, geez, this is, it was a prohibition was created, and now I think they're trying to figure out ways to get it done, but it's all back to education. Can we educate the legislator? This is what bothers me, is that we've got people who are making the laws and the rules and the regulations who may not be as educated as they could be, given even the limited amount of research that's out there.
That's a great question. I'm gonna turn it over to Chris, but before I do that, it seems to me that the leadership in our legislature is pretty well versed on the effects of marijuana and what they wanted to do by going around to other states where they had already passed that legislation and where it had been operating, to see if they couldn't learn by in better practices what was going on outside of Massachusetts. You might want to talk about it.
Yeah, I would say, since decriminalization and through the medical use program, there's been a lot of efforts to educate legislators, and I think that's only going to continue. And I think, as demographics change in the legislature, I think there's been a lot more interest in this issue in the last 2-3 years than I think than we've ever seen. I think that it's only going to continue, and I think you only have to look at the polling about the popularity of cannabis and the future economic opportunities and the revenue for the state. I think there's good. It's here to stay. The legislature has had the foresight to create a standing committee in the legislature to look at these issues. That's not going to go away, and I think that's on the education, the research, and the advocacy is only going to continue over the next 10 years.
It has to really continue. It's not only a growing industry; it's a huge growing industry, employing thousands of people in various aspects of what it takes.
Literally and figuratively growing.
Literally and figuratively. But let me say something, that when an industry becomes this large and this important, then you bet people are paying attention to it in the legislature. They're paying attention to it in the governor's office. They're paying attention to it in mayor's offices around the state, because it means a great deal to them.
Let's go to the mayor of Boston, Massachusetts for a moment, Mayor Walsh here. There has yet to be a dispensary open for adult use, recreational use in the city of Boston. Now, Netta in Brookline, just a few miles outside of the city of Boston, has done very well with it. But what is the biggest stumbling block with that? I mean, obviously we've identified the challenges that people of color have with banks and going out and getting a business loan. We recognize that. But isn't there a way to create some opportunity for these people in the city to
I think it's inevitable, Jimmy. And I think it's only a matter of time. The reason the roadblocks have existed, I think, is a very personal one for this mayor, to be very honest with you.
Yeah, no, I was waiting for that.
He had an addiction problem to alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and he knows what addiction can do to you.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what it can do to your family. He knows what it can do, frankly, to have this kind of disastrous effects that he did not want to see take place again. And he has watched other societies kind of get rid of addictive things,
right,
only to say, hey, what are we voting for this for? A legitimate question, I think, in his mind. That has been the roadblock, but I think he now sees that because of regulation, because of the way it's being handled in other cities and in other towns, that it is inevitable here. And in fact, we have a couple of clients here that are looking at various neighborhoods in the city of Boston right now.
Good. Let's hope so.
Yeah, and I think to Tom's point, they're coming. They're coming to the city of Boston. And I think I think one of the mayor's concerns, and I think one of the concerns of the BBTA was looking at other cities and how they've done it and trying to find that right balance. So there is not one area of the city that there's a concentration of, that one neighborhood doesn't have them, a disproportionate number of stores. So I think they're trying to find that balance, and it's a hot real estate market, and it's a very busy city right now for development.
Yeah, and of course, I've heard some horror stories about that real estate world. That some of the people that own the properties are taking advantage of those who want to open up cannabis industry events, businesses, and they're bumping up those rents.
Absolutely. Not only is that happening, but people who had borrowed money to get into a cash-all business are paying exorbitant rates in some cases.
Yes.
I mean, that's why the banking needs to be opened up to allow everybody in, so that you have as much competition out in that field as you possibly can muster, because that'll keep things kind of narrowed and prices down.
Right, and the mantra in Washington, D.C. during lobby days was it's a public safety issue here. This has to change. It will change. It's just a question of how many amendments are they going to throw on that Safe Banking Act? And that's what I found fascinating about politics, guys. I'm a sports guy. I know there's sports, politics and everything, but I was amazed at, it seems like everybody understands public safety issue. Let's open up the banks. Let's take it a vote. Let's get going on this thing. But no, everybody has little agendas, especially in Washington, D.C. I understand democracy. I get it. I don't understand the process of the lobbyist. Can you walk me through why there's always these attachments going on to these bills that I think are very straightforward?
Well, not only has the industry got lobbyists, but the folks who were opposing the industry, they too have lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one has the balancing effect to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it slows down the process. Democracy is great, but it's slow.
Right.
Democracy is great, but it's slow.
I got it. For safety reasons, I think.
Well,
Because the opposite is not good.
It's deliberative. It's a deliberative process.
That's
Right.
correct.
And for a reason. So they get it right when they finally bring it out. I understand
Exactly.
that. And by the way, the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, I hung out in the cafeteria at the Rayburn building.
Yes, yeah.
It's not like a locker room or a dugout or anything that I've been in before, by the way. Everybody's checking out who's having lunch with who and who's talking to someone. I mean, but I felt for the first time as a citizen of the United States that, oh my God, I really am in the middle of this, watching this unfold in front of my eyes. So
You weren't only in the middle of it. You were watching it, you were interviewing people, you were getting firsthand reactions from members of Congress to people who are in the industry, watching the balance take place and take form.
Right.
Pretty exciting.
It is an exciting time. And I was a history major. So to me, I feel like I am part of history. I always used to say I majored in old news and then ended up in news, but that's another story for another day. You mentioned the M word, the marijuana word, and you guys are in public relations. You know that word has some racist history to it. It came from the beginnings in the 1920s and 30s through Mexico, and loosely translated, that's an evil weed, and yet we're still using that word for a plant that everyone does accept is the cannabis plant.
Yeah, I understand the racial overtones, and I understand the use of the word. Nomenclature in this industry is being sought out as legislation and regulations are being sought out. Mm-hmm. And people will find it. And you keep using the word cannabis, and it will begin to stick.
Right. Well, I am. And we're pro-cannabis media group, so that's why we do it, too, which is another story. But what's fascinating, we're going to talk about the Farm Bill for a second, because while cannabis, and I will use the M word for a distinctive reason, the marijuana derivative of the cannabis plant has THC, the intoxicating molecule in the plant. Hemp is under 0.3% THC and is now legal in the United States to grow thanks to the Farm Bill that was passed in December. That's how the CBD thing kind of got in the way here, because it's like, well, can we get CBD through industrial hemp? Yes, you can. So now you have the marijuana plant that they're still putting the THC against, and now they have the cannabis plant as a differentiator, and in the middle is the CBD that's in both of these entities. Again, a fascinating time to be part of the CBD regulations. The FDA is getting involved with it. Do you see a time By the way, I did not ever think I'd see a time in my lifetime where we'd be talking about this in O'Neill PR. I just want to say that. That being said, do you see a time where you're going to see an infused menu? The FDA will actually allow you to put, I don't know, 5, 10 milligrams of CBD into a food item. Do you think that could happen? Come on, guys. I'm putting you on the spot here.
I think we'll get there. I think it's going to take some time. I think over the next 5 years, it's going to be, and I think as you pointed out, it's going to be a turbulent time. These next few years, we're banking. There's so many issues, to sort out, and I think it's an exciting time. And I think we'll get there. I think we'll get there on social consumption. But there's still questions about impaired driving. The legislators have questions about. How we work through those kind of concerns, I think, are what are kind of front and center for the legislators.
I think that's right. I liken it to the beer industry. We were talking earlier about it. 10 years from now, you're going to have national brands, and you're also going to have these kind of draft capabilities at specialty shops.
The microbrews.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's exactly what this industry is going to be. There's going to be major players, and they're going to be mom and pops. And they're going to differentiate the entire industry.
There's the thing about what's going on now, and Massachusetts can learn from what's been going on in California and Oregon right now, because I think they rushed into it. It's a different planet anyway, California, right? I mean, crazy. That being said,
that's what they say about us.
But we were here first. Just remember, right? Didn't it all begin right here? I'm pretty sure I read my history books.
Let's continue the program, Pilgrim.
So I guess the point being, I just wonder what's going to happen next with this. Where are we going? What's going to be the next evolution of the new normal? What are we going to see? Is it going to be in the food? Are we going to see it in our drinks? Are we going to be able to buy it off the shelves? And right now they've approved the topical use of it, which, by the way, guys, if you are an athlete and you do work out and you are sore after your workout, I do recommend finding a topical with CBD in it, rubbing it on, and amazingly, the pain goes away. Yeah. It doesn't go away permanently, by the way, but it does go away in that moment in time, and that's a good thing. That being said, that's just one example of using the CBD, the chemical that's in this plant. The cannabis and the cannabis hemp plant and CBD industries are probably going to dwarf the cannabis with THC industry.
Probably.
You understand why.
I met an individual the other day who said, who came to us. He wanted us to find some regulation opportunities for him in Washington. And it's a little premature, we told him. But what he's doing through technology is tracking all the CBD from around the world to its largest users and needers for distribution purposes. So he's in the IT tracking business for the what is it, CBD and
THC.
THC.
Yep.
THC is the intoxicating one, the one that makes you high.
And that's what he wants to do. He wants to track it around the world for use.
Interesting.
And so he becomes a broker through technology. And
they're actually talking about cannabis as a commodity traded as a future.
Oh, I think that's exactly where you're going.
Right.
It's going to be a global market.
Absolutely.
At some point.
Absolutely, that's where it's going.
And who's going to be the first one? Canada, Uruguay, those are the two nations that people have actually heard of, that have legalized this for adult use. This is an adult use product too, Thomas. I'm going to make this point because I do wave this flag of responsible use. Like any adult use product, when you use too much of it or you use it in a somewhat regular basis that it consumes you, it's dangerous. Moderation is the key for both alcohol and for cannabis. And that's why it's a plus 21 product.
Yes.
But we also know we're human, and everybody likes to push the envelope as a human. I wonder if the cannabis industry will embrace the responsible use like the alcohol industry has been doing over the last 5 to 10 years. Do you see that happening yet?
Well, I see it to a point, where it's kind of assumed and taken for granted. And we talked earlier about Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. They're now taking the product out of some of these bars,
right,
where they once sold it,
mm-hmm.
and that's because the urge for people to kind of travel to Amsterdam to go into a bar to get a joint and to smoke, the cannabis,
Yeah.
is kind of a ho-hum situation today, to be very honest with you.
Right.
And that's what I think is going to happen here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when the social clubs do evolve. I think the Cannabis Control Commission and Steve Hoffman have done a really good job of getting as much information as possible, and they really want to come up with a solution. I'm interested. Everybody is kind of waiting to see what that solution is going to be, because we have cigar bars, we have hookah bars, and yet we all understand that we don't want to use a flame inside a building because it can lead to fires.
Sure.
Right.
So there's a public safety issue. So that combination of how it's going to evolve, and you mentioned Amsterdam. Dan Adams from the Globe went over to Amsterdam to do a little research. I'll admit I've done a little field research myself, okay, just to see what this whole thing's all about. And I do have a medical card. I have horrible arthritis in my fingers and in my neck and in my body because I swear I was an athlete once. I swear I was.
Get some CBD.
I do every day, okay? Every day with my orange juice and my turmeric. I have this little cocktail that it has nothing to do with alcohol, but it has all this good stuff in it. And that's what I try to drink every day. And it keeps me going. And
that's great.
You know what? I made it this far. And I made it through today, and that's a good thing. Let's talk about the social clubs. Where do you think it can go with this? You mentioned the dangers of driving. Everybody understands operating under the influence is a challenge, not only for the law enforcement, but also even for those people out there who already do this, and they've been doing it for a long time. And if you've ever driven on the streets of Boston, our reputation as drivers are not great. I happen to take offense to that because I think the best drivers are in Boston, because you have to expect the most unbelievable thing you'll ever see in your life. Green light, stop. Red light, go. You just expect the unexpected, right? And you're prepared for that.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And that therein lies the rub for me, because it's like these people are already out there doing crazy things with their cars because of their own minds and what's in there in front. Oh no, I just have to drop something off, so I'm going to double park right here. I mean, social clubs. Can you come up with what you think we might see? I'm looking right at Chris to see what his opinion is on this. By the way,
yeah, I think we'll get there on social clubs. I think we'll get there. I think there's a lot of this ancillary businesses. There's tremendous opportunities, tremendous economic, growth and opportunity in kind of not just the recreational stores, but these other businesses, these other functions to really build it in as the culture changes. And I think that's, as Tom mentioned, the culture has changed so significantly, not only here in Massachusetts, but really across the country. If you look at the polling data, I really think that's going to dictate, creation of the social clubs, movie theaters, all these different kind of social opportunities to integrate cannabis. And I think that's going to happen. I think, the Cannabis Control Commission, I think one thing, because they've done such a good job, we forget what a monumental task they had in front of them. And they have made it look easy at times, but it wasn't. I mean, if you look at other creations of other state agencies and tackling an issue as controversial and as stigmatizing as this one was, they've done a lot. And I think putting that on the back burner until they can get to it after getting a lot of these stores up and running was a good thing. I think they're going to come up with a good compromise. So I think they're coming here.
Well, let's see how it works out, whether it's just vaping, which, of course, you don't have to have a flame to warm up the product in order to vape the product, or they come up with some other way where it's an outdoor patio or something like that, where, we do have outdoor smoking designated areas for tobacco smoke, right? You mentioned the word, we talked a little bit about Mayor Walsh and addictive behavior. One thing that people continue to preach about when they mention cannabis is this addiction. And I take offense to that just for a couple of reasons. One in particular, though, is if it is a product that improves your health, if this endocannabinoid system that's in all of us has been dying for years to be activated by this plant that's been around for thousands of years, okay? When are we going to get to the point where you understand that it's not an addiction, it's actually something that is good for you, that your body is looking for? And caffeine is part of our society. We are all addicted to caffeine. I missed coffee yesterday, and physically, I had a headache. I was dehydrated. I mean, it was not a good experience. Kind of scary, to be honest with you, when you notice that. When you stop using cannabis, there's practically zero effect. You don't notice anything. And that is very, very important when I talk to people about this. And I understand that the substance abuse people out there have to do their jobs too and warn people why it's an adult use product in the first place. You do want to use it in moderation. So I threw this theory to an oncologist. You know, Boston is the center of so much Dana-Farber cancer research. And if you look at cancer and you look at the history of it, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we didn't have to deal with cancer that much. When they put it in the 1937 Prohibition Act, all of a sudden, 20 years later after World War II, what have you, we started seeing this horrible disease creep into our bodies. So I ran the theory of the fact that we discovered the endocannabinoid system in the humans over the last 10, 15 years. We understand what the cannabis plant does to the neurotransmitters and building the autoimmune system that's inside of us. We've already understood that now they're fighting cancer using our own cells, this immunotherapy, right? Isn't it possible that if in 1937 they didn't ban cannabis, that they accepted it as a medicine as it was being used up until that point? Would we have rampant cancer in our society now? And I'll tell you, you're not an oncologist, nor I don't think you are you? No.
Last I looked, I wasn't.
Right. Neither am I. But when I ran it by him, this is an intelligent doctor in the Boston area. I don't want to use his name. He said, you know what? You may be onto something. It's a theory. We can't prove it.
Yeah, no, it's a theory. Who knows one way or the other. I do know this, Jimmy, that I had a very special friend who passed away from cancer about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. And he used marijuana and the cannabis plant to make that pain that he was suffering with really get subsided.
Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
That much I do know.
Yep. Well, you remember Lenny Zakem?
Very well.
Yeah, me
Very
too.
well.
We all do. I mean, and did you know his brother Stuart is the head of the Marijuana Business Association in Manhattan?
I had heard that.
Yeah, he is.
and it doesn't surprise me.
No, and MJ Headline News, which is one of his clients, is one of our affiliates on the Pro Cannabis Media Group.
That's
so
great.
Meeting Stuart was a thrill, and I said, I think your brother put us together for a reason. I just want to say. But anyway, guys, look, I could sit here and talk to you guys forever. I'm going to throw one more subject at you. The word pot shops. The Globe uses it on a regular basis. I understand, I've been in media a long time, that they don't write the headlines. Headline writers are different than the journalists who are writing the story.
Yeah.
There are people in the business that hate that term. They say, you don't call them booze stores. Why would you call it a pot shop? Do you think we're ever going to move beyond that? It's a thing. I mean,
again, I'm not offended by that word, to be very honest.
Okay.
I mean, and it's a word that my generation has used forever and a day, and it goes back to the late 60s.
Right.
However,
I remember the 62. Go ahead.
However, as I said earlier, the nomenclature is going to change.
Yep.
And as we get more familiar with the culture,
yep,
and the culture changes as well,
yeah,
you're going to watch those words change, and it'll take a very dramatic turn.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think the stigma is going away. I think, among my age group, I think in a lot of demographics, people are more willing since decriminalization, since medical, since adult use to talk about their use. Then I think it's coming it's more conversational than it was in the past, and I think that only helps.
And everybody has an opinion about it. And whether it's educated or not is really what the challenge is for the whole advocacy group.
That's right. And because of everybody's opinion and everybody not agreeing with one another, that forces the cultural change. So it's all good.
And we're all part of history. And we're watching democracy work.
In action.
in action. And I tell you, I cannot believe it's in my home state. That's all I got to say at this point. Guys, both of you, Chris and Tom, thank you so much for giving me some of your day. Appreciate it. So, again, for Hugh Drummond, who put this whole thing together, and for Brooke O'Meara-Sayan, who's behind this big monitor that I can't see, but I know he's back there making sure the buttons are working, and Tony Simonetti, who is doing a great job coming out of retirement, and I put him back to work again, and our executive producer, Joyce Gerber, who keeps me in line, which is always a challenge. I want to thank you all for taking the time, for letting me come into your life in some capacity to listen as I rave about what I think is the future, and in so many ways. So remember, it is a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for listening to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Revolutionary Clinics is just one of 49 medical cannabis dispensaries in Massachusetts, but there's a reason why it's one of the most popular. It's their patient-first philosophy. All day long, they teach, they educate, they communicate about this complicated plant called cannabis sativa. That's true whether you visit their Cambridge location in Fresh Pond at 110 Fawcett Street or at 67 Broadway in Somerville. Revolutionary Clinics, where the patient comes first. This podcast is produced by the Pro Cannabis Media Group out of Boston, Massachusetts, for the enjoyment and education of our audience. Any medical advice or opinions shared are not a reflection of the Pro Cannabis Media Management or any of the In the Weeds distributors, including CLNS Media and C-Suite Network.